Get it prepared. It's high tech. I'm doing it with my phone, and then I have like a separate phone that the whole thing is kind of a mess. I'm doing it kind of like the podcast guys did it,
Right.
like which is just doomed to fail.
Okay, everybody ready? Am I good?
I think you're good.
All right, great. So welcome everybody. So my presentation is on parallax scrolling. So what is parallax scrolling? So the parallax effect is what occurs when you have different layers and you have kind of like the layers that are further out move slower than the layers that are closer to the screen. So the classic example of it is in Mario, as you can see right here. And so people have adapted this kind of effect to make websites a little bit more interesting. So here are some examples of it. So this is kind of like just a very classical example. As you're scrolling through, things are moving at different speeds. Some are slower and faster. And here's another example. And so this is it being used in, it's the same effect, but it's being used for more of storytelling, for kind of like to like communicate an idea in a more interactive way. And so these are kind of common uses for it. And another example is that sometimes the same effect is used to create more immersive slideshows. All right. So the parallax effect, the entire scrolling effect can be implemented with the Scroller.js library. This is actually more than just parallax because you're able to do any kind of animation that's based on scrolling. And what's really awesome about Scroller is that you can implement it using HTML, and you don't actually even need to know any HTML to implement Scroller. So here's kind of an example of the implementation of it. This is kind of a demo that they put together. So you can kind of see that it's really robust and you're able to do a lot of different cool things with it. And actually, all the previous web examples that I've shown you were also all implemented using Scroller. So how do you install it? It's pretty simple. You just put this part of the script at the kind of near the end of your body section. And for mobile support, you're going to want to add Scroller body to the body ID. And the reason for that is that parallax scrolling doesn't really work very well on mobile. It's not very supported. So what they've done is kind of created pseudo scrolling, where as you're moving the kind of main element, it just kind of scrolls it. It simulates scrolling. So it's kind of like a hacky solution. You can read more into it if you want to support it on mobile. So demo time. All right. So I have a website here built using Jekyll. So if you want to know how to use Jekyll, check out Colin's presentation. So this is it's a pretty nice website, but I want to jazz it up a little bit. I want to add some parallax. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make this portion of it, I want to make it so that when I scroll to the top of it, that this text just disappears, so that we want to change the opacity of it. So how this works is that for scrolling in general, you have you have different keyframes. So the first keyframe is at the start of the document, and I want the element to be 100% opaque. And then once we've scrolled 500 pixels down, I want the element to be 0% opaque. So how this code will look is, first I have data 0. So this is when the element is at the top of the document. I want the opacity to be 1. And when it's 500 pixels down, I want the opacity to be 0. So this is kind of how it correlates together. So if we are implementing it, this would be how it would look. So this is just kind of the that entire element, or sorry, here it is. So this is that element right here. So I'm going to change the div tag out and just add it right here. And so once I do that, There we go. So you can see that this text starts to fade out as I get to the top. So that's really cool. But what else I want to do is kind of implement the classical parallax effect. So I want this background to be moving at a different pace than kind of the normal flow of the document. So for parallax, the background, farther layers that are out, you want to move slower. So kind of the same idea here. When I move down 500 pixels, I really only want the background to move, say, 300 pixels. So I've implemented the code right here. So this wrapper right here is this entire kind of background. And I want to make it so that, same thing right here, data 0. So right at the top, I want the background position to be, what is considered normal. And then when I've gone down 570 pixels, I want the position to just go down 300 pixels instead of what would normally be 570 pixels. So once I do that, you can see the background, and pretty simple. So that is parallax scrolling. And there's many different keyframes you can use, and these you can all find these online right on here. And you can just find more about it on GitHub. And that's the end of the presentation.
That's super cool. I was expecting that to be wicked difficult, and it actually looks like it's incredibly easy. That's so cool.
Yep.
Anybody have any questions?
Do you see any performance issues with it at all?
Nope. It's just CSS in JavaScript, so it's pretty simple, and it's used in all modern websites anyway. So if you don't really notice any effects, then you shouldn't notice it here.
Cool.
Oh, and it also doesn't even use jQuery, so it should be actually more performant.
Oh, nice. You should test it on Google Insights and see what happens.
Yeah.
If you don't add that mobile thing, does that just not have any parallax, and it's just kind of goes it treats it like it's a normal thing, or what's the default behavior?
So I think the default behavior was that it just doesn't scroll. So I think it breaks the site if you don't add that. So you should add that. It took a while to debug that. Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Anybody else have any other questions?
Okay, sweet.
Cool. Good stuff. If you could paste the links to the example sites, sometimes that would be super cool, because that'd be awesome to see if you actually see that actual implementation. Cool. Colin, I think you're up.
Anybody else have a bunch of feedback?
Yeah, I will post the link for Scroller, and actually on the GitHub page, there's a section called In the Wild with a huge links of examples. But here it is anyways in the comments.
All right, I guess I can do mine now. So I don't have any fancy slideshows. We're just basically going to jump in it. So what I'm going to be talking about is creating full-featured mockups in Photoshop to help you with your actual design and stay on target. So because normal mockups take far too long, I'm only going to do a little portion of it just to kind of give you the gist, and then we'll kind of go from there. And I'll show you what the end result is. Nothing special, but and why it's useful and how it can help you. So first, I'll show you this is just a simple idea I put on grid paper so everybody, so you can see what was going on, kind of have some rough idea. It's just something to base your idea off of. So this is kind of what we're going to start out with. So first I'm going to create a new document. And then what I typically have been doing is just creating it by width of 1200 and height of 3000. You can adjust these whenever you want or to whatever degree you want it to have. But it seems to be pretty nice for most websites. So the design is going to have a hero image in the background. So what we'll need to do is make it the right size. And I already have most of these dimensions set out already, so. And we this is going to be our header. So we're going to just make a quick group. I found that organizing throughout this whole process is super helpful. So the more organized you get, the better it's going to end up in the long run. First. I think I'm actually going to do a longer video too of this so that people can actually use it, because it has been super helpful for me. And if you're brave enough, you can actually, if you don't want to spend the money on Photoshop, you could use something like GIMP, which is 100% free, but it was a pain in the ass to use, so do it with GIMP. So what's really nice about this is you can adjust where you want your stuff to be. So you have this nice little pixel count. So what I've been doing is I've been putting whatever element I want at 0 and 0 from where I want it. And then I can easily go down and say if I want my header to be 60 pixels wide, I can get it pretty close. So I'll just, so right here we're at halfway through. And then there's going to be a pixel count. If you look at it, you know, your pixel count is going to be 30. So you can use that pixel count later for actually doing your CSS, and that's what's been super helpful. So the same thing here too is you have, you can easily find where your placement's going to be. So if you look at the pixel count here, I'm at 0, and I can just move this up to say, I think 100's pretty easy. And that's going to be centered, and that's going to be super easy for you later on to put into your style sheets and make this really nice. So this is kind of your basic header theme, what you can do. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it took me about 45 minutes to do the full layout, but this is actually what it ended up looking like. So this is just a basic portfolio theme. You have a few sections. You have You have your header section with a hero image. You have your articles section, your blog section, a little bit about you, a contact section, and your footer. And what's super nice is you have a design. You can go straight off this design and build your website without any issues. You know exactly what your dimensions are. You know exactly what the design you have. You know exactly what you want in the end. Obviously, you can make changes along the way if you need to, but my problem personally has always been I try and do everything from my own mental image, but then what will happen is that I will start working on something, and then I'll see something else. I'm like, ooh, I like that style. And then I'll see another thing. I'll be like, ooh, I like that style too. And then I'll try and incorporate all this stuff, and then it just looks like garbage because nothing is fluid. It makes no sense. Doesn't work. So I started doing this with the last couple websites I designed, and I've been redoing my website too, and it's been super helpful, fluid with doing it. So the biggest perks, I would say, doing it this way, and since you already have all your dimensions, and I can show you my grids here, what you can do is, so when I go into my CSS after I write my HTML, I can say, what dimension do I want this? How far from the next section do I want this? And I can say, okay, I'm about 50 pixels here, so I can put that in my CSS. And then I can see, what am I going to be from my article sections? Well, I know that's going to be 50 pixels. And then I can see, you know, what my images are going to be, how my layout's going to be, what font size I'm going to use, what font style I'm going to use. And it can just make life so much easier. And you don't have to think so much about it while you're in the moment. You can just quickly do it. So that's kind of it. I know every time we have a cohort, new group of people come through that everybody asks about mockups. How do you do mockups? How, you know, what software do you use it? And I found this to be a little bit nicer than pen and paper, a little bit more precise. Then you can have kind of a final image before you even start.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions? So,
if you have an EDU account or anything like that, you can typically get Photoshop for relatively inexpensive. So like I still have a .edu account from my previous school from like 5 years ago. So I still print the software through them because they don't have an expiration date on it. Or with the new, I think it's like what, $9 a month or $10 a month for the online Photoshop subscription thing, or yeah, $10.
So the question I have is like starting with like a blank slate is difficult. How did you like seeing the pieces come together? I can see how you built the things up, but I feel like I wouldn't even know where to start it all. I'd be looking at the thing and I'd be like, what do I do now? I have no idea. So how did you start? Did you try out different things? Like what was the iterative process?
Well, what I ended up doing was I wanted to redo my website. So, and I wanted to get a little bit more experience with just doing, you know, the fundamentals, HTML and CSS. I didn't want to add a framework into the mix. So I decided to go, there's a nice tutorial that I followed and went through the process of and I used Photoshop as the mock-up. So like, well, I might as well try it and see what happens. So what I typically do when I want to design a website is I'll go on to like Behance or Dribbble or something like that. I'll find the style of website I want to build, and then I'll just kind of figure out from there, and then just regular building blocks and kind of build up from it, and then just kind of see where that takes you.
Cool. Good stuff.
I have another question too.
Yeah.
There's a ton of tools that you have in Photoshop. Are they like the top 3 that you always use? You're like, okay, you always probably use the text field, the pixel counter. What are the top 3? And can you show how you can access them and where you can find them in the site nav?
Yeah, so let me share my screen again. And I am by no means a Photoshop guy. I barely used it. This was in the last week. I've touched it way more than I have in the last 5 years. So like I am not a pro by any means. This took me about a weekend to kind of get the basics down. So the things I use the most are creating ellipses or rectangles. So I created a circle here. So you just grab, you grab your tool, and what this would be is like you would have an image of your face on there. And same with the logo is you just took a tool, you click on the screen, and then you put in your pixel count. I mean, realistically, if you have a rough idea of your size, it's pretty easy to just go for a basic and adjust from there. So usually the logos I do are 50 pixels by 50 pixels. It's pretty easy to remember. And then you can just do some math to figure out like what your boxes are. So that's the biggest one I'd probably use because it's just super easy to create a block element or a circle and then kind of work within that small portion. And then cropping I use a lot. So I'll crop certain things like images when they get a little out of control in the text field. And that's realistic about all I use on here.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's basically what you need. Circles, rectangles or squares, and some
and some text.
And some text, yeah.
So I can show you like the redesign of my personal site that I've been doing.
Oh, you try and show off now?
No, that's terrible still. Like what I've been doing. So this is hopefully the end game of what my photography section is going to look like. It doesn't at all because I've just finished it last night. It doesn't look anything like it. But what I was doing is I would load up all these individual images and then I would just resize them to what I wanted roughly because I don't want to spend too much time on it. And then I'd just transfer them over, kind of adjust them for what I needed, and then go there. And then just page, like the one that I did, this one would be a single page site.
Yep.
And then everything else is just regular pages. But it's been huge help. I get ADD with design stuff and like I see a million designs I love and I just want to do them all on one site and it just never works. So you can't mix and match.
How do you put the guides in, Colin?
There is, let me share my screen. If you go up to view, you can click new guide. I made a hotkey for it. So my hotkey is Alt-Shift-Control-0 because there's a billion hotkeys in Photoshop and I don't want to screw anything up. So you just put it in a new guide and then I do every 100 pixels and then at the center I've been doing from the center out the next 50 pixels. It seems like you can kind of get things really nice in there. So then you can turn them on.
I think just to add on.
Yeah, like I said, I am not a pro. I do not use Photoshop regularly. I am not a professional by any means whatsoever. So
if you're making Bootstrap themes, you can go online and you can download Bootstrap templates, and they'll have the different like grids for like the 12 grid columns for like 3 different screen sizes, and it's a great place to start off with.
Right. And I've been mostly trying to stay away from Bootstrap and Foundation and all that stuff just because I feel like it glosses over a lot of important information as far as styling. And I think it's actually been almost easier and less complicated to just use raw HTML and CSS than using the layout. For like doing a web application, you need to get it up and going really quickly and you just want to see a visual representation. It's fine. But if you like want to do customer work or if you want to like really know what's going on, I think it's been super, super easy.
Cool. Good stuff. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Like I said, if I get some time, I'll try and go through a full mock-up and see where we're at. Maybe I'll just do a Jekyll mock-up and build a theme for the Firehose community or something like that on my spare time. But
cool. Good stuff. Awesome talk.
Thanks.
Solid.
Good stuff. So Tate, I think you're up last. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, mine's very non-technical. So if people are here to learn some new skills, they don't have to stick around for this. This is mostly me talking about myself, which is a topic I'm very well versed in. Let's see here. Oh, wait, not yet. So give me 1 second here. I don't like PowerPoint very much. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
We can't.
No? Okay. No worries. Hold on a sec.
Yeah, not yet.
Cool.
Now we can.
Now you can? All right. Which screen can you see? Just out of general curiosity.
The big presentation mode.
Perfect. All right. Awesome. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Tate. I was a graduate of the Firehose Project back in May. Ken was my mentor. And I spent some time at block.io. There's not going to really be any discussion of that, but just to give you guys an understanding, I had a little bit of technical experience before starting an online apprenticeship, but I just wanted to share some of my various experiences when it came to how do I get rid of this menu for this thing? Anybody know how you get rid of the menu for Zoom?
I don't think you can.
Well, that's a really cool feature. All right, screw it. It's not that distracting. So anyway, my presentation's
Hey, if you hover over it, there's like 4 boxes.
Yeah.
You can minimize it.
You can?
We can't see any of the menu. Only you can see
You
that.
can't? You can just see the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. This is going very well. Anyway, so, really what I came to understand through both the academic process and the interviewing process was how much it actually benefits you to be somewhat ignorant in an area, and how you should, temper your own expectations in terms of what you're capable of, and how questions can really be your best friend when it comes to any part of any job process. So just to give you a little background on myself, I was a former professional lacrosse player, head of sales, and a varsity coach. I'm not telling you this because I'm bragging. What I'm telling you is that my background lent itself towards positions in which immediate contribution was really my biggest attribute. So I'm used to those sort of environments where you step in and you do something right away. So reorienting myself and changing my perspective was a huge part about being successful. And not that I'm successful as a developer, but I just had to reset my own expectations in terms of what I was capable of within this variant. So on my very first interview, it was actually should have been very simple. I was just asked to build a basic Rails application. I did it remotely, so I had a guy doing a screen share, much like we're doing now. It sounds simple enough, so he just said, build me a controller, throw in some methods, and we can sort of discuss the idiosyncrasies afterwards. But I never asked any questions. I just started coding. I just started whipping out lines of code, trying to remember what I had done at the Firehose project. And I was nervous, and I was committing spelling errors. And it was a pretty terrible process because I simply tried to build what I thought they wanted to see and missed several key features and components in terms of what they were trying to distinguish with the interview itself. I mean, anybody can create a controller by going online and Googling, how do I create a Rails controller? But it takes a different mind to really understand why you're creating it and a more efficient way of doing it. So needless to say, I didn't get the job. So my second interview experience was a little different. It was an in-person interview in which whiteboarding was the thing. And I'd never actually been on a whiteboarding interview. I'd only heard the horrors of whiteboarding. So I went up there and I was given this problem. And it's, given 2 variables, which both contain integer values, swap the 2 values without introducing a 3rd variable. And spoiler alert, this is now lesson number 11 in the advanced job prep section on the Firehose project. I'm not saying I gave it to Ken as content, but it would be nice to be mentioned in a footnote. Just, plagiarism is a problem. So how did I proceed this time? I actually, before I even wrote anything or even picked up a marker, I asked the interviewer to write the problem on a whiteboard. I said, will you spell out the instructions? So he obliged, which was nice. He didn't have to do that. And then I asked every conceivable question I could think of. I mean, what did I have to lose? So I fired question after question at him, and I recorded the answers that I had, what I thought was pertinent, on the whiteboard itself. So then I had a general framework in which to operate. Now, I then mistakenly, albeit effectively, admitted that I didn't have a technical background. And so my reasoning behind asking all the questions is I was trying to understand every possible piece and scenario before beginning, because I didn't want to screw up again. And when somebody's watching you whiteboard, it's even more intense than when you're sharing your screen. When you're sharing your screen, and I'll admit I did this, you can fake like the connection went down and actually sever the screen share. I'm not advising that you do that during an interview, but it's, you know, it's possible to do so that people don't know you're not doing it correctly. Whereas if you're doing it on a whiteboard, you could just run out of the room, but that would reflect far more negatively on you as a potential applicant. So as soon as I said that, I actually saw his eyes light up, and I didn't realize at the time, but after I completed the problem, you know, I had spent a fair amount of time doing it. He looked at me and he said, you know, it's not what you know, but how you learn that appeals to employers. Things can be taught, but they can only be taught to those that are receptive to understanding. So that was a really big takeaway from this interview. And just to give you guys the spoiler in terms of how it's done, it's just a simple substitution problem. It's a temporary substitution in which you change a variable's value and then do some very basic addition or subtraction, or you can do multiplication and division if you want to. And it's simple enough. I mean, really, it's a 3-step problem. But if you don't ask questions, even the most simplistic subject matter can become infinitely more complex. So that really stuck with me. And so I eventually got an offer from this place, but I'm currently a Java developer for a firm in Minneapolis. My background is with a brief foray in Python, and then obviously the Ruby on Rails immersive apprenticeship with some JavaScript and HTML with the Firehose project. But even before I was hired at this juncture, I was very transparent with the person who was offering me the position. And several times I tried to rebuff the offer saying, I don't know if I'm qualified for this. But he kept telling me, you know, it's not my prior knowledge as the metric that they use to measure my ability, but my enthusiasm, my understanding of complex subject matter, and my desire to learn. So, you know, I'll continue on, but really, when it comes to an interview process, you can be wrong in several different aspects. But if you hit on key components that they're looking for, if you're teachable, if you're friendly, and if you show an enthusiasm to learn, that resonates far more than having the ability to actually create a complex algorithm on a whiteboard. Anecdotally, if you haven't asked Ken about his experience in his whiteboarding problem, I highly suggest you have him give you that little tale, because it was inspiring to me. You may not get the answer, but what they want to see is, are you going to apply the necessary effort, or do you get discouraged easily? Because quite frankly, most of my job is chasing down bugs and trying to find what broke. If I were to give up and get discouraged, then I wouldn't be much of an asset to the firm. But it's not that I understand, you know, our framework. It's not that I understand our IDE. It's not that I understand our complex database schema. It's that I'm willing to chase things down. And before you guys jumped on the call, Colin and Ken and I were saying that the modern developer is mostly a graduated Googler. But you have to know what to Google, and you have to be persistent enough to continue to Google. So anyway, on my first day, I stepped in there, and not having any background in Java, except for a little bit of stuff I'd done on my own, I was asked to quote unquote step through the code and pose some questions. So this is one of our simpler sides of our code. It's our queue messaging, which is how do we handle messages that come from the queue. What my firm does, just contextually, is we do analytics for suppliers and retailers. So think of Dick's Sporting Goods and Nike. They communicate with each other via documentation. We're the third-party middleman that handles all their documents. So if this looks overwhelming to you, imagine being on your first day and imagine somebody paying you to take a look at this. It's nice to be paid, but when you don't understand, you know, your natural response is, well, it's my first day, you know, or quack, quack, quack. So, you know, it's very imperative that you make them understand, you know, training wheels, right? You got to walk before you can run. So my response was, you know, keep asking questions, anything I could think of. I have a notebook just full of inane questions and responses. And I ask for any resource that they might have as part of their library. Every company that you're going to work for is going to have a litany of resources at their disposal. Whether or not their developers choose to leverage those is another story. But I was sitting next to a guy who'd been there for 5 years, and I asked him about good books that the firm had on the basics of Java. He said he hadn't seen any. Well, I looked over 5 minutes after he had said that, and he was using this $150 Java textbook as a monitor stand. So I really think, kind of missing the forest for the trees there, but you have to be persistent, So what I would do is speak with anybody who had a hand in the code. Any person who'd ever touched the code base, I would ask them, because you can kind of see signatures, and then, a lot of different people are going to touch a code base. But if you understand what they were trying to accomplish, it makes it a lot easier, because every specific developer has a different methodology for basically peeling the same apple. It's difficult because sometimes it's esoteric, sometimes it's, an outdated method. But in order to understand why they're doing it, you need to talk to them. So, I leveraged any online tutorial I could find. And to be honest, the firm was more than happy to pay for them. And then I spoke with Ken. The great part about the Firehose project is that you have these mentors, and they're not just your mentors during the program, they're your mentors after the program. I probably email Ken. We correspond once a week, once every 2 weeks, just things of that nature. And he's always willing to help out. I don't know. I can't speak the same for Marco. I don't know if I ever see Marco, but no, just kidding. But, and after talking to Ken, it was like, well, now I can understand, 9 words in that book. So, you're progressing, right? Like, you start to get context and a framework, you start to understand what's happening. I'm not saying that you're actually, proficient, but you're not completely retarded. You're just retarded enough to not be dangerous, And so the nice part was, so just to toot my own horn a little, this was my first addition to the code base. This was a branch I pushed up last week. This was a calculation for determining timeliness in terms of when retailers actually send their goods out. So obviously I had some assistance with this, but this was my first contribution to the code base. It felt pretty good. My natural reaction was, I am the smartest man alive, only to find out that we're in the midst of a code freeze, so none of this will actually go into production until February. That doesn't, detract from how great I feel about myself. But, it's always nice to be wanted, and nice to be a contributing member of the team. So, persistence is key. Asking tons of questions and just understanding that you don't know, and that people understand that you don't know. And the one thing that employers really dislike is somebody who, A, is unwilling to admit they don't know something, or B, unwilling to cooperate within a team to actually accomplish that goal. So, there's a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation. My first day on the job, I actually wore a suit, which apparently is like super big faux pas when it comes to being a developer. If you guys ever get a job, don't wear a suit your first day because you look like an asshole. Excuse my language, but don't be that guy. Okay, it's like wearing the shirt of the band you're going to see. Don't be that guy. But ask as many questions as you can and be willing to admit your own ignorance, because people are far more willing to cooperate with you when you are willing to listen. So that's about all I have. I know I ran a little over, so any questions you guys have, I'm willing to answer. And before I do, these are some of the resources that I use, and they're fantastic. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Pluralsight, but it's an incredibly good, it's got sections and then subsections and then subsections within the subsections. So, it's video based, but it's got a lot of good granular information for really complex subject matter. Obviously, Code Academy and Code School, it's nice because Code Academy, you get your hands inside the code, so you do some real-time development. Code School is nice because it gives you the videos and asks you follow-up questions. Udemy is a great site. I just kind of find through a friend of mine. They usually can be expensive, but for some reason, they keep sending me emails about $15 programs, which makes me think I overpaid, which is awesome. But any language, any framework you want, they have a ton of information, and they're always adding new content. And then one of the things I did before I started was get involved in open source projects on GitHub, because you can bring down an actual code base, you can break it, you can re-break it, you can keep breaking it, and it doesn't really matter, because even if you try to put it back up, most times it won't be accepted. So any questions, comments, feedback, anything you guys want to know, I'm more than happy to answer.
What are your thoughts on Java, Tate?
I don't know if I have enough time to cover all my thoughts on Java. But, it's not a bad language. It's actually, the more I learn about it, the more I like it. It's very declarative. You have to say everything. You have to state if something is going to throw an exception, because Java compilers won't actually handle your code. So for those who don't know about Java, it's a compiling language, meaning everything has to be done in linear fashion. It has to be done correctly for any part of the code to run. So that means, unlike Ruby, where you can run a certain section of code and then an error will populate, this all has to be done correctly. So you have to hard code exception handling into your code and then state specifically what type of value is going to be returned from a method. If it's a public or a private, if something doesn't get returned, you can't leave it blank. You have to put void. It's the idiosyncrasies can get frustrating at times, but Java is the most prevalent coding language. So it's not bad, and it's very flexible, and there's a ton of resources, which is nice. So if you encounter a problem, odds are several thousand people have encountered it before. So if you guys ever do start coding in Java, don't post on Stack Overflow until you do your homework, because I got yelled at twice for that by moderators on Stack Overflow, and they don't like redundancy. So it's a pretty good language.
Cool, good stuff. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, I have another question. How easy was the transition coming from Ruby into Java?
I'm still in the midst of it. So I understood the framework, right? It was a lot like learning Latin and trying to study a different Romance language. So it's like understanding the root of a word, but not understanding the nuances. So it wasn't that hard, because sometimes I'll hear people say, oh, this, and this. I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember what that's supposed to do. So as long as you sort of remember the fundamentals, it's not too bad. The biggest issue really is just changing the way you think about programming. Because if you try and think of it as like, I'm going to force my way through it, that's a bad perspective to take. So once I learned that while in school with you guys, really anything is accomplishable. It's just kind of, if one route doesn't work, back up, try a different way. So not that difficult. And really, I think once you learn something like Ruby, there's a lot of other languages that are at least somewhat similar that can be explored.
I have a question. Tate, how do you like your current job, and how would you compare it to what you were doing previously?
Okay, well, certain aspects I love. I love development. It's the most powerful thing I've ever done. I love it because I feel like coding is now the modern industrial revolution, right? So every time, like, creating that branch was honestly the best feeling I've had in a long time. So I love that aspect of it. I don't necessarily love being in a big dev shop. There's about 1,200 people, not all developers, but 1,200 people at SBS Commerce. So it's very bureaucratic and things move really slowly. We had a meeting today to discuss things we'd like to do to make our implementation more efficient. And a lot of things could be handled pretty quickly. But again, we're in the middle of a code freeze, and we have to get the go-ahead from 3 different department heads before we can put anything into practice. So the inefficiencies of a larger company start to wear on me at times, because I feel like that undermines my ability to do my job. But I wouldn't trade being a software developer for anything in the world. It is so much fun to create something and watch it come to life, and to contribute to a code base and to figure out complex problems. I mean, it's like solving a Rubik's Cube every day, right? Like, you start from scratch and you build it up, you test it, it fails, you're frustrated, start over again, test it, it fails, you curse, yell at your dog. There's a lot of things that go into it, but then that sense of accomplishment once you get to the finish line, it's pretty awesome. So I like it. I also get to work remotely 3 days a week. So wearing sweatpants every day is pretty darn sweet. Like, that was the reason I wanted to be in medicine, is so I could wear scrubs, but I can't stand the sight of other people's blood. So, but yeah, I really like software development, and I also like the resources of a larger corporation. Like I said, if I want to do an online tutorial, if I want to sign up for a new software, like I just started working with Sumo Logic. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but $1,000 for an annual subscription is nothing to a company this large. So we just submit it, they pay for it. It's awesome. So has its pros and its cons, but it's a great place to learn. I have a ton of great developers that I work with. So my goal was just to get better as a software developer, and I feel like I am doing so. Sorry if that was long-winded.
How's Minnesota as far as jobs go? I know the economy is similar to Wisconsin, especially in my area. Did you have troubles running into finding like Ruby and Rails jobs? Versus Minneapolis a little bit better, but
yes and no. I was offered 2 positions. One was a Rails development position here in Rochester, and then this other one was the Java position. So Twin Cities is fantastic. I wanted to stay in Rochester and work remotely most of the time, so that really narrowed my search. So it made it a little more difficult to find work. I was probably looking for start with the position in August, so probably about 3 months. Going full tilt. But Minneapolis, St. Paul actually has a very large tech community. They host an annual TechStars event up there. They have
there's a lot of tech companies based in
there's a ton. And actually, so last year, being 2014, 6 different tech firms had IPOs coming out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So there's a pretty big community out here, and there's meetups, there's cooperative working spaces. So it's actually a pretty good environment for tech. Now, obviously, once you get to the sort of surrounding rural areas, I'm down in Rochester, so it's mostly medical, and the primary software is C++.
Yeah.
So
that's how my entire area is too.
Yeah. So but there's always that one-off. So the Ruby firm that I was offered a position from is down here in Rochester. So, randomly, I found them through, some circuitous route, and we started talking. So, but I wouldn't, pin my hopes on something like that. So Minneapolis is great. Everything else, which is, comprises like the 95% of the geography out here, not so great.
Right. Cool.
Good stuff. Anybody else have anything for Tate?
All right.
Sweet. Well, excellent talk, Tate. It was fun to sort of hear your advice. I think it's spot on, the fact that you want to be teachable, you want to be enthusiastic, and people want to like the people they work with. And it's something that people don't really spend a lot of time talking about. But it's super, super important. And big kudos for giving me that problem, which I could put on the platform. That was taken directly from Tate. I'll have to add some cliff notes in there, but it's actually a super common question. Tate told me it, and I'm like, oh, the XOR trick. He's like, how do you know that? It's like, yeah, it happens. But thanks so much. That was awesome. And thanks for everybody for coming. All the talks were excellent. Cool stuff.
Yeah, if you had any thought on, I know this is kind of off topic when we're done with lightning talks, but next talks, do you have preferences, or should we skip December?
Let's talk about it after. We can figure it out, because we have a couple of things coming up. So Thanksgiving is next week, and then Christmas is sort of like around then too. So maybe we want to skip it. Maybe we want to have it. If anybody wants to do one of the next lightning talks, send Colin a message and let him know. And we can sort of see what the sort of, if we have a bunch of people who want to do one, maybe we'll have one in the middle of December. If not, we might hold off until January. We can play it by ear.
Yeah, and there is still a list. If you want to give a lightning talk and don't know what you want to talk about, there is an available list of lightning talk topics that you can go through that people would enjoy seeing. Everything on the list that hasn't been submitted by everybody else has been submitted by me, so I at least would enjoy watching it. So, yeah, give a lightning talk. That'd be awesome.
And feel free to upvote too if you see one that you want to do.
Yeah, I'd really like to. I'd like to get more people either submitting topics or interests that they would have. Even if you don't want to give one, totally cool. But just the act of submitting a topic, and it doesn't even have to be Ruby or Rails. It can be something tech related or in the same vein of what we're doing. But just doing that goes a really, really long way of helping other people out. So which helps people actually, throw up some more ideas on there. Maybe people will get a little bit more braver and some talks.
Cool. Good stuff. All right, guys. Well, I think we're gonna call it a wrap. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for everybody who gave a talk. They were excellent. And we'll see you in the next one. And we don't know when that is, but we'll keep it posted. So yeah, we'll see you guys all later. All right, see ya.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yep.